Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad, this is my channel Animate Orange, and welcome to a Metal Earth review video for something that unfortunately is no longer being made. We have the CAT Dozer right here. And I start off with saying this is no longer being made. Unfortunately, this model has been retired. This is one that I picked up a little while back, shortly after they retired, but they were still somewhat easy to get. You can still find this model out there, though places like eBay, they're starting to ask a little bit more money for them because there are people who still want them. You're still able to find them, but once they're gone, unless of course a copycat picks them up. But honestly, if one of the infamous copycat names picks this model up, I'm not sure that I'd want to build it because it is kind of a delicate model. And I don't say that to be insulting. It is a wonderful build. It is challenging. It is one of the more challenging models, but not terribly so. And it has a lot of delicate parts that aren't forgiving. There are a couple of parts that are extremely unforgiving. And if it weren't for it being made with the materials that Metal Earth makes it with, probably would end up with a lot more broken parts than I did. Fortunately, I got everything together without breaking anything, though there was a couple of instances where I did not think that was going to be the truth. I did really enjoy this model. I do want to take a little bit of time to go over some of the hiccups that I ran into during this build. A lot of things I cover in the build video are just basic, watch out for this and watch out for that, and make sure you fold things over in the direction see this. A couple of things to kind of reiterate on these stacks right here. These exhaust stacks are they fold up into a really thin square, tall square shape, and it's very difficult to get your tools inside of that to fold things properly. And a trick that I've kind of worked up, and I talked about this recently in another build, is when you've got the flat part, you're trying to fold it up into a box shape. What you do is you start with that middle seam and give it just a slight bend, and then the two outer seams or two outer edges, you fold those all the way up at 90 degrees, and then once those are up, you kind of pinch the two corners that you just folded together so that that middle seam bends in, and you end up kind of closing it up the shape. And that usually works pretty good if you are careful with it, and you might have to kind of touch up a little of the edges by pinching things together, but that method usually works 98% of the time, works perfectly. Every now and then it doesn't go quite right, but there's always that one in an off chance that things are not going to go as expected. But usually is a pretty good method. It worked very well for these two items right here. Starting on page 3, you work on a piece that's kind of on the inside of this track. It almost looks like a side of a train piece with the wheels attached. And on page 4 you work on the other side. I may have that backwards, I'm not sure. But there basically is one long middle section that folds up kind of narrow, and then two end sections that attach. The instructions indicate to twist a lot of those tabs, but there were a few of them. They ended up folding over just because there was not really good room to get to them and twist them. And the end pieces of the center part, when you fold the end pieces in, and there's that one tab that connects it, I folded it out and away from the part instead of inside on that flap, because if I folded it inside, it would kind of get in the way of the two end pieces fitting flushly, if that makes any sense. So I kind of folded it outwards to keep it out of the way. The parts came together nice and clean, and also really you can barely even see that part, so you don't see that the tag is kind of, or the tab is sticking off in a kind of an odd place. And then you start building the inside piece that makes that sort of rounded triangular shape, and there's 3 different wheels that attach in the corners where the part bends. I mistakenly thought it was just two different numbers. I originally thought it was just 23 and 24. It's actually 2 23s and 1 24. And I tried to put the other 20. I tried to put 24 here and folded it the wrong way, because both 23, if the palm of my hand is the engraved side, the pieces actually fold backwards. 23, if this part of my hand, the palm of my hand is the engraved side, the flaps fold like that, so that the part fits on the back side and the detail faces out. But part 24, the piece that goes in the top here, folds so that the engraved side would be the back of my hand, the flaps fold backwards because it sits right on top and the detail faces outwards. I got that a little mixed up, but it didn't take me long to figure out that there's actually 2 part 23s, 1 part 24, and they attach slightly differently than the other. Putting this rear assembly together was kind of interesting and not quite what I expected. One thing that I learned, you keep putting together all these cylinder pieces with just a stick hanging off, and it's like, well, how are those going to attach? Are those supposed to be tabs? Am I going to have to twist it? I was worried that I'd have to twist it and twist the whole thing, and it just wasn't going to work. And what ends up happening is they're basically just slots in. Like this piece right here has 2 slots, and down here is just a slot where they just stick in. They don't really attach, they just kind of hang there, just stick into the slot and let it go. This piece on the back was wobbly when I first put it on, because there's 4 close together tabs that you have to get to around this part, this claw. And initially I didn't twist them good and tight because I was just struggling to get in there, and this was wobbly, but I went back over it more carefully and tightened some of the tabs, and now it sits pretty sturdy, and those end pieces stay in place where they should go. So then you move on to where you're assembling this upper cab area, and you've got these 2 pieces on the end that connects to a piece that connects to the body, and I'm really not fond of how those come together. I'm specifically talking about parts 54 and 56. I'm not fond of how they're designed. 54 and 56 are these little pieces at the bottom that part 55, which is the taller part on either side, attached to. 54 and 56 have one flap that this attached to is held on to one side piece that folds down and a tab goes in the body. Then another side piece wraps around, and that's the other tab. Would have preferred it if the flat piece was connected to all the sides that fold down, so that you'd have more than one side piece holding that flap. But because it's only connected, the flap on, say, 54 that 55 connects to is only held on by one thin seam, and it flexes, and I had trouble with it. It kept flexing back and forth as I was trying to assemble it, and I was like, this keeps up, this is going to break. I managed to get it on without breaking it. I was more careful with the other side and attached 55 to 56 first, then folded it up and attached it straight away, so it didn't get flexed as much. Because what happened is, trying to attach it after already bending it down and attaching the part, it kept getting flexed. The other side didn't flex as much, and then you have to put this top piece on, which is part 61, and I didn't really push these tabs all the way down. If you look closely, they're not squished as much as I'd normally squish tabs, because I was worried about putting too much pressure on that little bitty seam and breaking it off. I didn't want to do that, so I just got them down enough to, its part's not going to go anywhere, and it's just sitting there, so it's not like it's holding on any weight or any other parts or connecting to anything else. And I wish they would have designed that a little differently, so that the part that connects together, just all the side flaps folded down, and that was it, rather than just one side folds down and the rest of it wraps around. Not fond of that design, but it's, you know, it is what we've got. Then it's a little bit weird. You've built this cab piece and you've built all the pieces around it, and they show it's coming together, but there's no tabs connecting it, because quite simply this piece has to be under the rest of this when you attach it to the rest of the framework, because it also kind of sits slightly sunk in, so you couldn't attach one part and then easily attach the other. So the 2 assemblies show them coming together, but it's just because they need to be together as you're sitting it on the body. You could possibly do it one at a time, but it's an unnecessary struggle, and it's just easier to just kind of set them on there together and line up the tabs. That's what I did, and it worked out. I should go back, I almost forgot, when it comes to building the tracks. You get to the part where you're putting the 2 pieces around it that makes the actual track. One thing that I didn't quite catch at first is the slots in these individual track pieces aren't down the center of parts 25. Parts 25, that's 4 of them, the 2 of them connect together from one side, 2 connect to the other side, but the seam, if you lay them flat and look, the lines that it makes for the slots is offset. It's not in the center, and that offsetness, it should be put so the offset is facing away from the body of the dozer, so that more of the track sits inside and it sits flush against the body, or pretty close to. And I originally put it so that it was offset and the extra sat away, and I had a difficult time wrapping around and getting everything to line up, and it kind of warped the inside. When I went to the other side, I realized the mistake I made. I got that side on a lot easier, came back, pulled the first side off, flipped it around and it went back together easier than it did the first time. So I wouldn't have thought that they were spaced so that it would cause it to be a problem, but it looks like they are. Put it on the wrong way, you're going to have more trouble getting it to work, and it's not going to look right in the end getting everything together. Very small note, when you're doing the bottom piece, part 66 and 67, the instructions kind of indicate that all of the two side pieces fold over at 90 degrees and the end pieces just bend down a little. The side pieces don't really fold down in a straight 90 degrees. They kind of flare out slightly. If you fold them at 90 degrees, they're not going to line up with their slots quite right. Not a big deal. You probably figured it out for yourself, but I thought I'd make a note of it. And then putting the bucket and all the pieces on, as you can see, the end result is a bit wobbly, but when you set this thing down flat, it turns out just fine. The strips from these two cylinders are supposed to go in a couple of slots in the back. You could try to line it up and hook the ends around so that it holds it there, especially if you wanted it to be in a raised position. It kind of did that, but I'm not going to worry about it. It sits however the ground is. It just sits there, though I don't want to keep flexing it the way I'm doing. I'm trying to hold it by the side pieces so it doesn't flex as much. But beyond that, it is fairly straightforward. Just take your time and connect the pieces as it says. It is this model. Let me put some stuff down. So I've got a lap full of paperwork here to make sure I comment on all the things I want to comment on. These CAT models kind of marked a point in time where Fascinations was starting to move into a little bit more detailed and complicated models. Prior to this, some of the Star Wars models were a little bit complicated, but a lot of their models were fairly simple unless you got in the Iconics lineup. The Iconics lineup did get more complicated, but a lot of their basic Metal Earth models were not too bad. There were a few on the challenging range, but a lot of them were easy to medium range, which is fine. And there certainly was a group of people out there who were wanting more of a challenge. And shortly before this, we had the Ironman models, which was a big step up in challenge for just a Metal Earth model. It wasn't an Iconics. And it was a very challenging model. It was a lot of fun to build, and a lot of people loved it. And right after that, they started coming out with things like the CAT Dozer, or not Dozer, but the CAT lineup and the Freightliner lineup, which really started to raise the bar with the detail and with the complexity of the model. And it's a shame that the CAT lineup didn't last very long. I don't know the reasons why. I've asked a minor amount of questions, but I don't want to become a nuisance. But for whatever reasons, the CAT lineup is no more. However, if you look, most of the CAT models seem to have gone on. They've just basically they've been unbranded, and they're now in color. So all the other models, I haven't compared instructions, but they look like the same build. But the Dozer is the one that didn't carry over, and that's unfortunate. I'm glad that I was able to get a hold of one, and I'm glad that I was able to build it without breaking any parts, because I don't know that Metal Earth would even have spare parts at this point. I'm going to bet that they do not. But it kind of signifies a point where the Metal Earth models started to become more interesting and complicated and more challenging, which a lot of people are going to say, I think, would say is a very good thing. And I'm glad to have finally gotten this model built. It was a challenge, but it wasn't a frustrating challenge. It wasn't a hair-pulling challenge. I think I've got one more CAT model left to do, and I do have it, so eventually I'll get to it. But of the CAT models that I've built so far, I think this is actually the easiest one. Still a challenge. It was, as I pointed out, a part that I disagreed with the construction of, but in the end I really enjoyed building this model. I'm glad to have done it. This was a viewer request, so thank you for requesting this and giving me a good excuse to build it. I'm sorry it took so long for me to get to it. The summer has been a bit busy. But for all the CAT models, while it's a challenging model, and it's a wonderfully detailed model, and it has just a lot to it. And I've never really seen a dozer like this up close. I didn't even realize that this was a thing. And that's another one of the fun things about building these Metal Earth models that I've kind of missed with some of the things that I've been building lately. Something like this is a thing that I would likely not ever see up close and in person, but now I have a fairly detailed model of it, and it makes me curious to kind of go on Google and say, what is this thing and what is it for, and learn just a little bit more about it. It's trivial, It's probably never going to be important to me because I'm never going to drive or use one of these things, but I like learning little tidbits, and this inspires me to do so. So thank you, Metal Earth, for producing these models. I'm very sad that the Dozer was gone. I'm sure I'm not alone. It was a very fun build. Maybe someday we'll get it back. That would be great. A lot of people, I think, including myself, would welcome it back to the shelves. Now, at the end of all of the reviews, I've started a little thing where I asked myself, what would I do differently if I had to do this all over again? And the one conclusion that I come to in almost every build is there's a number of things that I just simply misunderstood or did wrong that now that I know, I'd be able to do it correctly. But there were no really big issues with this model that now that I know, I would definitely do differently, with the exception of maybe the way I assembled these parts back here that I was talking about. Parts 54, 55, and 56. Just knowing now that the way that first one went, that would be the biggest thing. If I could only take one thing back and do this over again, would be how to do that part. Fortunately, it didn't break and I managed, but I could more easily do it now that I know. Connect the part 55 to either 54 or 56 first, then shape 54 or 56 and attach it to the part, and that would just work out better. Other than that, it's just paying more attention to things like, not putting the track on backwards, or the fact that this one piece actually has two parts. And those are just simple oversights that sometimes I honestly get a little carried away, and I'm pretty sure I know where the direction this is going, and that's where I end up being not careful and making those small mistakes. And I'm far from perfect, but that's one of the things that I do here, is I make these mistakes so that you don't have to. I'll leave it at that. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you to Albert Fish for requesting this model. I apologize for taking so long to get to it. Thank you to my Patreon supporters for continuing to support this channel. And thank you for your comments and responses and feedback on all the videos that I make. If you have any questions or comments, as always, leave them down below. And keep on keeping on.